Okay, you just got back from a long shoot. Maybe you're shooting a wedding, or maybe you're shooting a short film or a vlog, or maybe even just an interview. And everything on your camera looks super epic and it looks so good on the little monitor on your camera. And you can't wait to start editing, so you run to your computer, you dump all the footage, and you drop that footage on the timeline, and it's all overexposed. So you look over your waveform as a sanity check, and yeah, you see the little hats. It's all overexposed. You can't bring that back. So what do? You either live with it or you throw out the footage. Well, in this video, we're gonna talk about how to make sure that that does not happen. And specifically, we're gonna talk about doing that on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. What's going on, y'all? If we haven't met, my name is Tyler Edwards. I'm a videographer based out of Charleston, South Carolina, where it gets 5 billion degrees here in the summer. And I also like to make YouTube videos like the one you're watching right now. So if you're new here, definitely hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell next to it so you'll be notified when more content like this comes in the future. And you can wait to the end of the video to hit that thumbs up button just to make sure you actually do like the video. If you don't like it, hit that thumbs down button too if that's what you're into. Anyways, today we're going to talk about getting proper exposure in camera, and we're going to use the Pocket Cinema Camera 4K as the case study for this video because it has my favorite exposure tool ever on any camera. So no matter what you're shooting, whether it's a vlog or an interview or a wedding or maybe even a short film, you want to make sure that you properly expose your image in camera before you even hit that record button. And the reason why you want to make sure that you're properly exposed in camera is to make sure that when you drop that footage on the timeline, all the necessary information in that frame is exposed properly, so you don't have those blown out highlights and you don't have those crushed shadows, so that you can have a good starting image, a good base point for your color grading. And my favorite tool of all time of making sure you got proper exposure is false color, and that's why we're using the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera to talk about false color, because it has this tool built into the camera itself. So what I've done on the Pocket 4K is here on the top, I've actually just got a button that I've mapped to the preset button. I've just mapped to toggle false color on and off. So if you're not aware of what false color is, basically it is an exposure tool that maps different exposure values, shadows, all the way to highlights to different colors on the monitor. Now, it doesn't bake the image in, obviously, it's just a way to reference for monitoring to make sure that you have the proper exposure values for whatever scene you're filming. And the reason why I love using false colors is because it doesn't just show you what's being overexposed, such as zebras. That's what zebras do. They show you what's being clipped and it's overexposed, but it also shows you what's being underexposed, and it shows the exposure values over the entire spectrum of the scene, of what's in the frame. So for example, we'll get a little inception right here, and you can see right here what's going on this side of my face where the key light's coming from. It's in the kind of the pink toned on the false color spectrum, and then right here it's a little bit contrasted, a little darker, and it's green, which is kind of like middle gray, and all the background right there you can see is green, which is middle gray. Now, how do I know that? How do you know what the colors are on the Pocket Cinema Camera 4K? Well, unfortunately, they don't have a little chart at the bottom, which would be really helpful, but if you go to the user manual, they have a little page in the literature, and it explains all the different, or most of the values on the spectrum of false colors. And so what I did is I just kind of memorized what color kind of is attributed to what exposure value, and then I just kind of use that as a guide going forward. So for example, going back to the screen right here, you can see that I'm pretty well exposed here, but if I go and blow this out, you can see, say this light over here just above me, that is completely blown out. It's in the red. And then right here, you can see there's a little bit of yellow. That's getting close to being clipped, and that's just on this camera. And then right here, this is really light gray. And if we were to turn that off, you can see that I'm really overexposed. The benefit of this camera is it does shoot in RAW, and there is a lot of flexibility. And with bigger cinema cameras and stuff that have the ability to shoot RAW or in log profiles, it has a wider dynamic range. So when I was talking about all the necessary information, when you use a camera that has a wider dynamic range, you can capture more information in the scene so that you have more information to deal with in post. But that doesn't mean you need to use all of that information and keep it there. It just means that you have it at your disposal. But without using a proper exposure tool and just relying on your eye and the monitor that's on the back of your camera, you may actually be overexposing those highlights to the point where you can't recover that. So say I were to boost the ISO all the way up, you can see now that my skin on this side of my face is completely blown out, and if I turn the false color off, I'm gone. And right there, you actually wouldn't be able to bring that information back because it's too overexposed and it's actually clipped to the point where there's no more information in that frame. But even though this camera shoots in RAW and it has 13 stops, dynamic range, and yada yada yada, there's a point to where if you clip the highlights to a point, no highlight recovery in the world, world is going to bring that back. And that's why it's so important to use exposure tools like false colors to make sure that whatever that you're exposing for in your scene is properly exposed. Just because it looks good on the monitor on your camera doesn't mean it's going to look that good when it comes onto your bigger monitor or your laptop or whatever you're editing on, just because a lot of times the smaller monitors on these cameras aren't very accurate. Now, the one on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K camera, that's actually a pretty good monitor and it's a pretty accurate monitor, but I still would not rely on it to use for exposure. I use it for composition. Definitely use false color for exposure. And for the most part, exposure is a creative choice. Just like adding a color grade or a LUT or something to your edited footage, that is your creative choice for the particular look you want to go for. Same with exposure. The importance is making sure that you're exposing for the look that you're going for in your project. So for example, if you're going for a scene where it's, a little moodier or contrastier and a little darker, you want to make sure you bring your exposure down, but you want to use that false color to make sure that you're not actually crushing your shadows to the point where you don't have any information in there for either you or the colors to work with. But you know that, okay, my exposure values are a little lower. So for example, I shot a scene of a groom in a wedding. I decided to have kind of a moodier, more cinematic look to it, where I didn't expose the skin tones to 50 or 60 IRE because that wasn't the look I was going for. But on the flip side, for this video, for example, it's kind of more of like an interview talking head setup. So I really wanted to focus on the talent, which is me. Not really talented, but I wanted to focus on me and I wanted to expose for my skin tones. So what I did on this side of my face, because this is where the key light is coming from, just off to camera right, I wanted to make sure that my skin tones were properly exposed. And how I did that was using an external monitor, using my C200, and you can see right here that I'm using a small HD 501 monitor with false color set up on it to make sure that I'm actually properly exposing for my skin tones. So like I said, for the most part, exposure is a creative choice. There's no hard and fast rules about exposure, but you want to make sure that you're using the tools at your disposal that are on your camera to make sure that your exposure is set up the way that you're expecting. So yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about in this video, is using false color to make sure that you are nailing exposure every single time in camera. I think it's the most powerful tool for exposure. If you are able to use false color in your camera, especially if you have the Pocket 4K, definitely use that for exposure, because you're going to be able to figure out the exposure values for the entire scene and the entire frame, as opposed to just seeing what highlights are blown out or whatever, or just relying on that little tiny histogram at the bottom corner of your camera. So anyways, guys, if you found this helpful or informative or entertaining or anything like that, definitely give it a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.